Welcome back to Proxima, everybody. And today we're going to be actually doing a video on something directly tabletop related, not on the units, not on the kind of special rules of units or anything like that, but we're actually going to be looking at how to position your Craftworld Eldar units effectively on the battlefield. And we're just going to be covering the basics today. This was actually a request by one of my subscribers. And it's actually something that a lot of Eldar players have trouble with in the beginning when they're starting their armies and when they're starting to play, because Eldar are a very tricky faction. They require a lot of key positioning to work effectively, and a lot of the times if you mess up, you position them too close or too far. Their short range and their typically low toughness and survivability will spell doom for you. So what I have planned for this video is I've kind of gone over 3 common scenarios that I found kind of occurring in almost every game on the tabletop, and I'm going to show you guys how to navigate through them effectively to the best of the Eldar's abilities. And we're going to go over the basics of basic Craftworld Eldar positioning, movement, and assault. So essentially what I mean by the basics is I mean the basics of moving, shooting, and assaulting, and then preventing the same thing. So a lot of times as Eldar, you want to prevent damage as much as possible. We're not Space Marines. We can't weather the storm, so to speak. We don't have really extremely tough units outside of Wraith Guard of dealing with that. Normal Marines are pretty tough, to be honest. And if anybody's ever played a Space Marine faction, it doesn't seem like they're that tough because they do still die. But the thing is for a regular tactical Space Marine, you're only paying about 15 points. And for an Aspect Warrior, Eldar Aspect Warrior, paying much more than that. And the thing is Aspect Warriors are essentially, worse armor save in most cases, and they have a lower wounds count and lower toughness. So if you present your Aspect Warriors into a position, if you put your Aspect Warriors into a position where they can be easily shot at, a much cheaper unit like a Space Marine unit can easily fry a unit of Howling Banshees at range. Even if the Howling Banshees have -1 to hit and stuff like that, the Space Marines are still going to outtrade those Howling Banshees. So basically, we're just going to look at some scenarios which you might find yourself in, that you might be having trouble in as a new player or as a more advanced player with the Craftworld Eldar. And some of you may be of the thought that, Craftworld Eldar aren't really great at holding objectives because they're so, they have a lack of survivability. And in most cases, you'd be right. There's very few Craftworld Eldar units that are actually good at holding objectives. So we're going to go over those 3 scenarios and let's get into it. So the first scenario we're going to be looking at is shooting positioning. So what this means is your position relative to the enemy unit when you are shooting them. So the key here is that Eldar units, even though they have a short range, they don't want to be too close to enemy units, because when that enemy unit, or if that enemy unit is allowed to retaliate, they're going to hit the Eldar unit much harder than the Eldar unit can hit them usually. So let's say you're on the offensive and we have a squad of Space Marines or some kind of equivalent troop hiding in some ruins. So they're going to already be getting a good bonus to their cover saves and so forth. Now, if you're trying to attack them, you're going to have a really hard time at dealing damage to them. But you don't want to really kind of put yourself into a position where you're shooting a unit and they're getting the advantage on you. So how do you work around this? Because you need to actually take them out, and typically, unless you have a combat unit that's ready to assault them in terrain, that's not going to be readily available. So what you want to do is you first want to make sure that you maximize the distance between your unit and the enemy unit by attacking on their flanks and not straight on. So what I mean by that is, like, let's take a unit of Dire Avengers, for example, which will be marked F on the left-hand side of the diagram. Now, I've positioned the Dire Avengers on the piece of paper, and by the way, none of this is the actual scale, okay? This isn't actually 18 inches, but I've marked it to look like it. So if you see here, each one of these Dire Avengers is 18 inches away from not the unit, but a single model on the left side. Now, basically, the reason why you do this is because if your units or if your models in your unit are in range of at least one model in the enemy unit, then you're basically counted as in range of the whole unit. However, when he measures to shoot you, he has to measure from the model. So being able to do this is really important because this minimizes the number of attacks he's going to get back at you once you end up using your battle focus. So you're going to shoot him at 18 inches, and you're only going to be in range in one model, but that counts as the entire unit being in range. So you're going to shoot him. You might do a few casualties. Now, with a unit of Dire Avengers, they're pretty good at doing damage. They're probably not going to kill the entire unit, though. Maybe 2-3 models. Then you're going to battle focus back. And what this is going to do is this is going to eliminate his chances of actually being able to rapid fire you. So at most, he's going to get 2 shots back at you, and you will have won that trade very easily without having to really be in terrain yourself. So, maximize distance between your unit and the enemy unit by attacking on the flanks and not straight on. If you attack straight on, most likely not only will you be in rapid fire range of their unit, most likely, right? But you'll be in range of other units that are also in that vicinity. So you can see another enemy unit on an objective to the right. If you attacked that first unit, that enemy unit to the left, straight on, you would have been in range of that unit too, and you would have been crossfired and killed. And those Dire Avengers would not have made their points back. Because, again, remember, I mean, Dire Avengers are pretty cost-effective units, but killing 3 or 2 Space Marines and basically then just dying is not an effective way to use your unit, and you won't get your points back, and they won't be cost-effective that way. This way, your opponent is going to have to choose between going after your unit or sitting on the objective, and most likely he's going to try to just stay on the objective to earn points on it. He's not going to go after your unit. So your unit on the flank is relatively safe for the time being. Now, let's say that you are in an objective in the center of the field and you have more troops that have just walked on the objective, right? So here's the thing about being on an objective. You want to make sure that you are on the back end of the objective, as far away from enemy units as you can, while still being on the objective so you can make points. Now, the reason this is because you want to be as far away from enemy troops so that they don't have as many chances to shoot you. So you see that enemy unit right there sitting on the objective on their side of the board, right next to the ruins? They're going to be outside of 24 inches of you, of that objective. So that means that they're going to be outside of range of your models. Now, what they could do is they could move up to shoot. But if they move up to shoot, they're most likely going to end up off the objective, which they don't really want to do. So they're going to have to choose now between killing your unit and capturing the objective. So essentially, he's going to have to make a choice here, right? And that's what you want to be doing as Eldar. You want to give your opponent, you want to make your opponent make choices. Do I shoot the enemy or do I capture this objective? You don't want to give the enemy both things in one turn. You don't want to give the enemy the option of saying, okay, well, I'm going to shoot you and I'm going to stay on this objective safe and sound. And you see, that way the enemy gets what he wants. His objective is secure, and at the same time, your objective is not. Most likely, if that Marine unit were to be able to shoot at you, or a couple of different units would be able to shoot at that friendly unit on the objective to our bottom right, we would lose our unit because we're Eldar, we're not really good at holding objectives. We would lose our unit, and they're going to keep their unit on the objective because they're rather tougher and harder to take out in most cases. So again, to sum this up, attack enemies on the flanks, and then battle focus away. That way you minimize the amount of damage that they're going to be able to retaliate against you on, or with. Also, when you're positioning your troops, make sure you're outside of 24 inches of the enemy, especially if they're on an objective. You don't want to give them the option of being able to just sit there basically for free, capturing objectives and shooting you. So make sure you're out of range. And if you really want to be safe, make sure your unit of infantry is outside of 30 inches to begin with during your turn, if you're on an objective. Try to hug the edges of objectives so that you can still count as capturing them without actually, bringing yourself into more danger than you have to be. So, yeah, basically, essentially those two things for that. And in general, that'll help you tremendously not only save your own models, but also play the objective game much better, and make it harder for your opponent to actually, do what he wants to do. And I think that's really where the Eldar strength comes in the objective game, is not necessarily sitting and holding objectives, but making it hard for your opponent to hold his objectives, at the same time making them make hard choices about what they actually want to do in the game. Cause damage or score points. Now, the second scenario we have here is preventing assaults to your shooting units and capturing objectives. So basically, a lot of the times you might find yourself in a position with your shooting units where you get too close to the enemy and then they assault you and wipe you out. And because typically, if Eldar get assaulted and they're striking last, they're probably going to die. And they don't have much in the way of a save, toughness, or wounds to be able to deal with any kind of assaulting unit. Even regular Space Marines, by the way, will often beat units like Dire Avengers up in close combat, absolutely move them off of objectives, and then guess what? He is now capturing that objective, and you've just lost your Dire Avengers, and they're off the objective, right? So here's how you prevent that. So, first of all, let's say that your Dire Avengers disembark that turn. Let's say the previous turn you positioned a Wave Serpent near an objective so that you could capture the objective next turn. And they move a squad of 5 Space Marines up there on the rear of the objective. And they also think that they're safe because they have a Land Raider with maybe 5 Terminators in it close by that can run into support if you choose to move any units on that objective. And, if anyone's ever fought Terminators, especially with the new Armor of Contempt changes, you will know that is an extremely dangerous proposition. They are very good now. Especially with shooting weapons, they can just devastate at range or in close combat. They're a very decent unit. So, let's say that you have that Wave Serpent there and you choose to disembark your Dire Avengers, and with a few buffs and some supporting fire, you manage to move your Dire Avengers up into the objective and kill the enemy unit. Well, here's the problem. Now you have 5 Dire Avengers on the objective, and that's all great and stuff, right? But there's Terminators waiting, and you know that they're going to be in range to assault you next turn. So here's what you can do. The Wave Serpent can still move at that point. So this is what used to be called Fish or Fury. So it was a strategy designed several editions ago in order to protect shooting units. So basically what it was is it worked for Eldar and Tau because we had skimmers and we could see under the skimmers, so we could have clear line of sight to shoot. However, enemy units could not assault because the skimmer would be blocking their way. Well, the same holds true here. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to, after we're done moving the Dire Avengers, we're going to move the Wave Serpent in the direct path of the Land Raider. So you see the Land Raider to the right here? It could also be a Rhino with some sort of combat unit, either one. We're going to move it diagonally in the direct path of that. And there's a reason why, and I'll get into that later, but basically after we're done destroying the unit on the center objective, we're going to use the Dire Avengers Battle Focus ability to move directly behind the Wave Serpent. Now, you don't want to move too close to the Wave Serpent because the Terminators or whatever unit could kill the Wave Serpent and then consolidate into your Dire Avengers, which would be a bad deal, right? So we're going to battle focus a little bit behind the Wave Serpent in about that position so that whatever's inside of that Land Raider cannot assault, because when those models get out of that Land Raider, they will have 0 direct charging lines into your Dire Avengers, which essentially means this. Your Wave Serpent is now preventing those models from getting on the objective, and when your turn comes around, you're going to score points on that objective, and they're not. Technically, you're going to have 6 models on there. So, I mean, they could move their Land Raider over there and stuff like that, and that's all fine, but they're not going to be able to steal that objective from you in most cases, because they're not going to be able to get their Terminators on it. Now, they could, if it's a shooting variant of Terminator, they could shoot your Dire Avengers. They could kill a little bit of them. You'll probably still have a couple left, but they could shoot you. They could definitely try to kill your Wave Serpent in close combat, but both of those things are kind of hard, and they probably won't successfully do it with just those models. It's going to require a lot more of their army to be actually doing that. So, essentially what you've done here is you've won the trade, because a Wave Serpent and a squad of Dire Avengers costs much, much, much less than a unit of Terminators and a Land Raider and whatever else was on that objective. So, if you're forcing your enemy to spend much more resources to be able to, kill a couple things on the board so that they can get an objective, then you're winning on other areas of the board and they're still not getting those points. Again, unless they invest a bunch into actually taking it. And even then, they might not be able to get their Terminators on the objective to be able to score. So, worst case scenario for you, nobody scores. Best case scenario for you, they can't kill any of your units, and at least you'll get some points on that objective that turn. And yeah, you might lose a Wave Serpent, you might lose some Dire Avengers, but you're going to win out that trade and come out on top of that scenario. So, to sum things up here, when you're using shooting units that are inside of Wave Serpents, use the Wave Serpents to your advantage, use them to block lines of charging, use them to clog up objectives so that opponents can't get to them, and basically just use them to prevent enemy movement. That's a great way to use Wave Serpents. Now, with troops, make sure that they are behind the Wave Serpent, but not too far behind, or too close, because you don't want whatever scary combat unit is in there to actually successfully kill the Wave Serpent and then consolidate into the troops behind it. Because if they're allowed to do that, unfortunately, there's just nothing you're going to be able to do. You can make your attacks, but they probably won't do anything, and then you'll probably lose that objective because you'll most likely have less models than they do. So you don't want to do that. You want to make sure that you have at least 5 models left at the end of the turn. And again, this isn't a guarantee. Honestly, in some cases, 5 Terminators with luck can kill enough Dire Avengers to make you flee, and then they can kind of just move their 5 inches, maybe advance and get lucky and roll a 6 or something like that, get on the objective and take it from you. That's always a possibility, right? But at least you're making the Terminators advance, you're forcing them to do that, and they're not going to be killing as many enemy models as they would have normally if you had positioned poorly. So again, with Eldar, it's all about making the enemy take hard choices. And yeah, in this case, the best choice for Terminators, which they only have 5-inch movement, by the way, might be to just try to get a lucky advance or something like that. But in most cases, they're going to take the damage and they're going to try to kill your Wave Serpent, and you're going to score points on that objective instead. So, bottom line on that one, use your Wave Serpents to block movement and stuff like that. It will help you tremendously. Now, the last scenario we have, I call preventing assaults and assaulting. So essentially what this is let's say you have a unit of assault troops in a Wave Serpent, right? And your Wave Serpent is on the left-hand side of the board, and you position it kind of about 14 inches away from the objective, the rear of the objective. in the previous turn because you know that the unit inside of the Wave Serpent is an assault unit and you want them to be in range of assault next turn. Now, this is a very common positioning tactic when using assault troops and Wave Serpents. You want to position them the previous turn so they're in range of an objective if your opponent decides to move troops on it. So let's say your enemy takes the bait. He moves troops on it because, he can't really afford not to. So he moves 5 units, or just 1 unit of 5 Space Marines on the objective just to hold it in place and force you to react. So what you're going to do now is you're going to disembark your troops, which might be, let's say, Striking Scorpions. You're going to move 7, and then you'll pretty much auto-charge them because with Strands of Fate, you're essentially guaranteed a 7-inch charge if you get Strands of Fate. There's a little bit of luck there, but chances are you should be able to get a 7-inch charge. So you charge in, right? Now, that's all well and good, but let's say that you wipe out that unit on the objective. Guess what? To the right, they have a ruin, which is obscuring terrain. It has 5 Space Marines on it. Those 5 Space Marines are going to turn around and they're going to shoot your Striking Scorpions to death. Now, I know that doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but if they move out from the objective and they rapid fire you, especially with a plasma gun, your Striking Scorpions are probably going to die and you're going to lose that objective to those Space Marine models. So here's what you're going to do. To block off the Space Marines from being able to, get out, rapid fire you, and then possibly even charge you afterward to finish you off, you're going to move your Wave Serpent in their path directly. And this is going to do 2 things. First of all, this is going to give them a harder target to shoot at. Because typically, unless they are directly, they have direct line of sight, they're probably going to have a harder time seeing the Striking Scorpions. Now, of course, they could probably still see a little bit, but it might prevent some models from seeing it, so you're saving them there. Second, it's going to prevent that unit from moving closer to that objective and getting within a good rapid fire range. So their shooting is going to be much less effective against you, and this is going to guarantee that you can actually capture that objective, stay on it for a turn, get those points, and then your Striking Scorpions can move on from that unit, that objective, and assault those Space Marines the next turn and kill them. So, and you can move something else on the objective like the Wave Serpent. Now, your other option is to use the Wave Serpent to not just block the enemy, but actually assault the enemy, right? So your Wave Serpents are extremely fast. Now, obviously, the Wave Serpent isn't going to do a damn thing in close combat. It can't really do anything. But what it can do is it can tie up a unit in close combat and force them to either fall back, or it could force them to stay in combat with the Wave Serpent. Both scenarios are eliminating that unit from the equation when determining who is going to end up controlling that objective. So, you basically have 2 options here. You can charge your Wave Serpent in and force them to attack the Wave Serpent. Of course, the downside to this is that the Wave Serpent can't really do anything either, which is unfortunate, but Wave Serpents aren't really that important. The second thing you can do is if you do want to fire your Wave Serpent's weapons, you can just move the Wave Serpent in the path of the unit so they can have a harder time of moving around it, and shooting the unit of Striking Scorpions or Howling Banshees or whatever combat unit just secured that objective for you from that other unit, right? So, and also remember, if you don't have enough movement with your Wave Serpent to get right in their path, you could always still advance if you don't quite have the movement to do this. You will kind of sacrifice some of your shooting weapons, but you can still fire your shuriken catapults, which aren't bad. And, there's worse things that can happen. Usually Wave Serpents will be equipped with something like twin shuriken cannons, which are good, don't get me wrong. But, they're nothing to write home about in most cases. In most cases, you can sacrifice them if it means being able to stop an enemy from getting on an objective and things like that. So anyway, basically to wrap this scenario up, To successfully assault an enemy unit, make sure you position your Wave Serpent about 14 inches away, well, actually a little farther than that, about 17 inches away from the end of the objective, the farthest end of the objective, to make sure that you can assault whatever unit, kind of moves onto that objective the next turn. So that's the first thing. Now the second thing is, if you want to prevent enemy units from either assaulting or getting in a better position to shoot that combat unit that just took the objective, whether it be striking scorpions, howling banshees, or whatever, move your Wave Serpent in the way to block them, or you can straight up assault them. Now, be careful with assaulting, because if you assault a unit that's good in combat, like Terminators or something like that, you're not going to have a good time, because they're going to kill you during your own turn, and then your striking scorpions are going to be next. So I would be careful about that. If you're going to assault your Wave Serpent, make sure it's a very shooty unit, something like Devastator Marines or something like that, something that can't really do much in close combat, and not a close combat oriented unit. So it is an option, but you do have to be careful what kind of unit you assault. But if it is a unit like Terminators, or it's a unit that's, kind of better at close combat or has a few tricks up its sleeve that might make it a danger to the Wave Serpent, definitely still move the Wave Serpent in their way so that they have a harder time of getting to the objective. And at the very least, you're preventing a lot of shooting and, the possibility of actually getting assaulted and losing that objective that turn. So again, I think Eldar are not good at holding objectives. I think they're good at taking them and then moving on to the next thing. Whether that be killing another unit, moving to another objective to take that, or what have you, that's what you should focus on your Aspect Warriors and other units doing. We don't have a lot of units in our army that can just sit there and hold objectives all game. There are a couple that are good at it. I know Wraith Lords can do it fairly well because they're pretty tough and they have ranged weapons. Wraith Blades with, Force Axe and Ghost Shield, or no. Ghost Axe and Force Shield. I keep getting that mixed up. But the Wraith Blades with the axes and shields can hold objectives pretty well once they take them. Obviously, you don't want to just put them in the backfield. That would be a waste of their potential. But they can hold objectives fairly well once they get on them. Rangers are good at holding objectives in the backfield because they can just sit on them and shoot, and also perform actions and stuff like that. But in general, your Aspect Warriors and other more fragile units do not want to sit on objectives all game. And if you're using your Dire Avengers to just sit on objectives and you're there for more than 2 turns, there's a problem with that. And they're still alive. Well, I'd be surprised if they're still alive unless you're really winning the game hard. But you don't want your Aspect Warriors to be doing things like that, like sitting or camping objectives. You want them to be constantly moving, constantly attacking, and looking for new targets. So in conclusion, to sum up these kind of three basic scenarios, in general, it's always better to hit a unit on the side where it's less supported, basically on the flanks, so that you can be in range of the enemy, but they won't necessarily be as in range of you, if that makes sense. So if you hit them on the side with something and shoot them, you'll remove their models, battle focus away, and then they probably won't be in a great position to hit you back. Whereas if you hit them straight on, they'd be more supported, they'd have more units to shoot at you, and chances are you would lose that trade. Always be aware of threat ranges as well, so both the enemies and your own, and position yourself accordingly. If you have an assault-based unit that you're wanting to get into combat, make sure you position that unit or Wave Serpent outside of 17 to 14 inches away from the back end of an objective. That way you know that either A, the enemy unit's already on there and that you can assault it, or B, the enemy unit's going to be on there because your opponent's going to want to score objective points too, and he's going to have to do that if he doesn't want it taken from him. So make sure that you kind of account for that. And remember, don't be afraid to pre-measure during games. During a game, make sure you can, like if you need to position your Wave Serpent correctly, most of the time, Wave Serpents have pretty good movement. I mean, movement 16 if they're not damaged. You can have a fair amount of leeway when positioning your unit. So don't be afraid to, pre-measure to the end of it and make sure that your Wave Serpent is in a good position to unload its units next turn. And also use obscuring terrain to block line of sight. Don't think about where you are, but think about where you're going to be after you battle focus or the next turn so that you can plan accordingly around that. Use ruins to your advantage. Remember, the opponent can't shoot through obscuring terrain if you're on the other side of it unless he is within it himself. So, make sure to keep that in mind when hitting the enemy's flanks as well. And lastly, use vehicles like Wave Serpents, Vipers, Falcons to block enemy charges and prevent them from getting on objectives and making it harder for your enemy to get within things like rapid fire and within range to shoot you. Because remember, the farther the distance between the enemy unit and your unit, the less chances there are that he is going to be able to draw line of sight. Remember, this is a game, especially in matched play, where there's going to be an insane amount of terrain on the battlefield. And if it's not obscuring terrain, where it means the enemy can't see you at all, then most likely it's going to be some form of dense terrain where you're going to get at least -1 to hit if they're shooting through terrain at your unit. So make sure you use terrain to your advantage as well, and use vehicles like Wave Serpents, Vipers to block those lanes of movement and their options to shoot you from a closer distance. Alright everybody, that's my video. I know it's kind of a quick one, but these are just the basics of unit movement. If you have trouble seeing any of the kind of charts or anything like that, I guess you can enlarge it. My writing's not the best. If you do have any questions, please let me know in the comments. Or if you have anything to add as well, please let me know in the comments. I love hearing your guys' feedback. And again, these are just kind of the basics. It doesn't go into too much detail. It's funny, I was actually looking for an app or some sort of kind of computer program that would be able to do this electronically, but it was hard to do, so I ended up having to just draw it myself. So a lot of these things aren't to scale, and you might notice that some of the objectives seem off, like they're not quite the distance, but that's because I had to draw them out by hand and write it by hand and stuff like that. So, if you do have any questions though, let me know. And, thanks for watching the video. I hope you guys learned something from this, or can take something away from it, whether you're a new player or, an old hand. And yeah, thanks for watching. I will see you guys in the next video. Have a great one, everybody. Peace out. See you guys later.